Hi there, I'm Adam Leventhal. Welcome to the preview on the Athletic FC, going deep on the biggest game of the weekend, Manchester United against Tottenham, and getting you ready for all of the Premier League action. Joining me once again is Tim Spiers. How are you?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, despite the weather. It is very, very rainy here across the UK. John Mackenzie is here as well. You good?
I'm good, yes. I'd like to say to the YouTube viewers that my glasses are at hand. I'm simply not wearing them. I've not changed anything else about my life. It's just I've taken my glasses off, so yeah.
Variety is the spice of life, John, isn't it?
It is indeed.
It is. And we have a different lineup this weekend in terms of the Premier League fixtures, obviously, but we have a Monday Night Football. That is my point. 7-2-1 across the weekend from Saturday through until Monday. Let's go through the games for you. Saturday's early game is Newcastle against the leaders Manchester City, without Rodri now, of course. That game is at 12:30 in the UK. That's 7:30 Eastern time. There are 5 3pms or 10am. Chelsea 3 wins in 4 against Brighton. Brentford take on West Ham, who've lost 3 out of their last 5. Arsenal face lowly Leicester. Relegation scrap between Everton and Crystal Palace, and there's Forest against Fulham. The 5:30 or 12:30 Eastern is bottom club Wolves up against second place Liverpool. Then on Sunday at 2 o'clock or 9am, it's Ipswich against Aston Villa. Then it is Manchester United against Tottenham at 4:30 or 11:30. And the Monday Night Football at 8pm or 3pm Eastern is Bournemouth against Southampton. We've got expert analysis on all of the games from our team here at The Athletic to come. So let's kick off with Manchester United against Tottenham on Sunday afternoon. And we'll get a quick briefing first from our Manchester United and Spurs reporters, Jack Pitbrook and first Laurie Whitwell.
It's shaping up to be a really important game at Old Trafford on Sunday when Spurs visit Manchester United, both for United as a team and the players there, but also for Erik ten Hag. Given everything that happened at the end of last season, I think those doubts will inevitably creep in, certainly from a fan base point of view, the longer that this kind of awkward run continues where, United have won 2, lost 2, drawn 1, 7 points, only scored 5 goals from 5 games. It's not a great run, and it's not the kind of sequence that really restores faith in a manager. So I think Erik ten Hag will be desperate to turn that kind of form around. But Spurs could be the perfect answer to that, because I think the way that Ange Postecoglou has them playing means that United are maybe able to counter-attack better. They're not going to stand off and sit back. They are going to come at United, and I think that potentially leaves spaces for United's attackers to go into. And that being said, they're creating chances. They created a lot at Selhurst Park when they drew at Crystal Palace. They're actually third in the table for expected goals. I know we shouldn't put enormous faith in that kind of stat, but equally I think it gives an indication as to their scoring potential. It's just putting the ball in the back of the net.
So 6 games into Tottenham's season, I'd say the picture so far has been pretty mixed. 7 points isn't a great haul in the league.
So there you go. Some interesting thoughts from Laurie and finally there from Jack. Tim, they come into this game with vastly different feelings after their contrasting Europa League action, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Spurs a pretty comfortable 3-0 win despite some against Karabakh, despite some difficult circumstances. Being down to 10 men, and Vicario had to make quite a few good saves. And then United just sort of the opposite feeling. A losing draw, they'd call that in cricket. It's Ten Hag said he's been looking in the mirror. Or he was going to look in the mirror after the game, so I assume that's what he's been doing for the past few days. It's just it's such a roller coaster. I pointed out in an article today that if you look at Ten Hag's comments after every match, everything's either amazing or disastrous. After the Palace draw, he was like, "Oh, we ate them alive." It was an amazing performance. I don't know. There's just no sort of consistency. It's such a soap opera, and the pressure's really piling up already on him and United. You look at that point in the Europa. Their next 2 games in the Europa League are away at Porto and away at Mourinho's Fenerbahce. 2 really difficult games. After that, the fixtures get easier, but still, the pressure's piling up. And in the league, they've got Spurs here, which will be a really tricky game, and then they've got Villa away before the international break. And you're looking at potentially being bottom half of the Premier League and struggling in Europe going into that October international break, when the pressure would be seriously on him at that point. You'd have to say, the fans, as with Postecoglou, as Jack was just saying, the fans aren't as with Ten Hag as they were a year ago. So, you just never know what you're going to get with United. They're so prone to calamity, like we saw with the goal against 20 on Thursday, which was absolutely ludicrous defending. So I'm really looking forward to the game though. It's two very flawed teams, but teams who will go on the attack. So they had a couple of decent games last year. It was 2-0 to United at Spurs, and then it was 2-0 to Spurs at home, and then 2-2 at Old Trafford. Really good game in January. So expecting more of the same.
John, I wanted to just get your take on the goal that Manchester United conceded in midweek. How bad was it?
Yeah, it was bad. And I think it sort of plays into part of the reason why the way that Tim has framed that is that, these are two very chaotic teams, and it's hard almost to try and do anything predictive in a show like this of a game like that, because we've seen the same thing happening from Spurs as well this season, right, where they've largely deserved to win against Newcastle but become undone by a single moment of poor defending. In this instance, Bart van Rooij, the one of the defenders of Twente, just ran through the whole team. He did get dispossessed eventually, but then Eriksen was really loose on the ball, and then Sam Lammers ran through and scored the goal. And it's those sorts of. I think a lot of the time when we're talking about football, we're trying to do analysis. Consistency is super important, and I think that the problem with trying to analyse teams like Spurs and Manchester United at the moment is that they aren't consistent, despite the fact that most of the big six teams tend to be consistent. They tend to be, okay, this team is bad or this team is good, whereas what we're seeing from both of these teams, I think, is sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. If only there was a more pithy way of saying that some Italian manager had once said. But that means going into this game, I think it will be a fun game, but it's also almost impossible to have a sense of which way it will go, because I think it will be decided by moments. Which team does take their chances, but which team makes the more defensive errors? Which team leaves themselves slightly more open? Can Manchester United actually force the hand of Spurs, because Spurs tend to leave themselves quite open when they're attacking, etc. So it's a tough one to call, I think, and as a result, it's sort of a tough one to see which way it will go. But I think, as well, the thing is, as you said, like, it will very quickly become, I think, a touchstone for, is this the turning point for this team's season? I think both teams haven't really played anyone good enough really to give us a sense of how good they're going to be. I think this is maybe a fun fixture in that respect as well.
It's interesting, isn't it, Tim? You've got in between the two dugouts one manager who's got hard and fast principles, perhaps to his detriment, in Ange Postecoglou sometimes, and then Erik Ten Hag in his third season, sort of still wafting along without really any clear identity.
Wafting, yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I mean, neither of these teams has been consistent for a long time now.
But you know what you're going to get with Spurs, don't you? Because in terms of how they play, because right. Ange he's rigid. He says, well, that's the way we're going to do it, mate. That's it. That's what he says. So they stick to it, right?
Yeah, that was good. That was good. You don't normally do impressions unless they're of the partridge variety, but that was not bad for you. I know what you mean, but in terms of performance levels from certain players, they have been wildly inconsistent. And the fact that certain players in form make them such a better team. If Bissouma's playing at 100%, if Maddison's playing at 100%, and Bentancur as well, then they've got one of the best midfielders in the league. But that hasn't been the case for a while now. And you look at their results since they had that amazing run at the start of last season, 26 points from 30 available. Since then, it's 47 from 35. Which is almost, an entire season now. That's mid-table, basically. That'll get you sort of 9th or 10th. So that's a very long time frame. And if that's repeated over this season, then you'd be questioning Postecoglou at that point, because minimum 6th really with this squad and with the money that they've spent. And then you look at United in terms of consistency. They were 8th last year. they're 11th in the very early standings now. This is where these two teams are at, really. And United are such a sort of one step forward, two steps back. And that's just creating this never-ending, like I said, emotional roller coaster and this pressure. Spurs less so, and they've got these 3 wins in a row. Coventry, and then where they scraped through. Good win against Brentford, and then a good win in the week. So a little bit of confidence for them, a little bit of form for Brennan Johnson, which is great to see. And you can see their team sort of coming together a bit now, with Solanke now playing, because obviously he missed games at the start of the season. Him, Son and Johnson as a front 3 with Kulusevski in behind. I really like the look of that. I don't think they'll go that attacking this weekend, but that's a good platform for a good attacking basis.
For people tuning in for the very first time, John Mackenzie has a band, and his backing band are called the Underlying Numbers. What have they been saying to you, John, about the performances of these two sides, Manchester United and Tottenham? Are they saying, actually, John, Bobby, who plays drums, are they saying, no, actually, they're going along okay and they've just been unlucky, which was intimated by Jack and Laurie earlier on?
Yeah, well, I can feel the weight of our dear colleague Mark Carey sitting on my shoulder, telling us that after 5 games we shouldn't be taking too much stock in the underlying numbers. And I think it's wise not to in this instance, because both teams have had fairly interesting situations so far. So I'm going to teach you a phrase: game state. Have I used the word game state on this podcast?
Hell maybe? Yeah, a hell of a lot.
What I mean by game state is that the way that the game is set up will change whether or not a team is going to be more attacking or more defensive. And there's been a few games for both of these teams which has changed things a little bit. So both of these teams have had games where they've played against relegation strugglers and they've put up a lot of XG in that. So that's bumping it up a little bit. The other thing is that both teams have spent some time in games behind, which has meant that they've I guess you could call it stat padded a little bit. They've boosted their stats a little bit. So, for example, Manchester United put up a ton of expected goals at the end of the Liverpool game when they were already 3-0 down. That I would say that raises questions about how sustainable that chance creation is. The other thing as well, Southampton, the Manchester United put up a lot of expected goals right at the end of that game when Southampton were down to 10 men. So these are the sorts of things that you have to take into account when thinking about the underlying numbers. I think the underlying numbers are positive for both teams, and they should be looking at that and saying, yeah, we are generating chances, we are making sure that we're reducing the amount of chances we're giving up, but I think it's too early to say, and I think the games so far have been a little bit unusual. So again, that's why I mean about this game being quite an interesting one for two teams where we don't really know what level they're at yet. I think those numbers will probably iron themselves out after they've played a few more tough fixtures, and we'll have a better sense of where they are. But certainly for Manchester United, the numbers look much better than they did last season. And for Spurs, we see the same thing happening we saw last season, which is, they play attacking football. They're going to put up a lot of chances. The big question with them isn't necessarily as obvious by looking at the underlying numbers, because the question is, are they going to give up those couple of chances, which are big chances, which make it harder for them to win those games, as we saw in the Newcastle game. So, yeah, positive things there, but take with a pinch of salt.
Okay. Tim, if you were in either Ange Postecoglou or Erik ten Hag's shoes, which set of players would you rather be looking at in the dressing room as you sort of pat them on the bum and say, go on lads, have a good game? It's what football people do, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I just wasn't expecting you to say that. Who would I rather be looking at? Just sort of, facially, aesthetically?
You can go either way. You could go more holistically, more the intention of my question, or you can go literally in terms of who you find more attractive in the respective dressing rooms.
But are we looking at, a serious riposte here, are we looking at, who do you want in that? Because they say, who do you want in that dressing room?
Yeah,
exactly. Are you talking about characters or footballers? The
composition of the respective teams and squads, I would say. Who would you rather be bossing?
Man United for sure. I think on paper, that's a pretty much a top 4 team, top 4 squad. They've got players who've won an awful lot of trophies. They've got an awful lot of very experienced internationals. That's not the problem for United.
Okay, so let me flip the question round to you then. Which set of players would you rather be? Which manager would you rather have giving you orders?
Postecoglou without a shadow of a doubt. I'm not Ten Hag's biggest fan. I think I've stated that a few times on this podcast. I really like Postecoglou's principles, and I really hope it works out for him at Spurs. And yeah, he's kind of gone a bit. He's kind of gone a bit even more attacking recently. If you look at the composition of his 11, with Maddison sitting behind Kulusevski, and Bentancur as a sort of most defensive player in there, and then you've still got Porro and Udogie, and you've still got Romero and Van der Ven as your centre backs. It shouldn't work at all, but it's great fun to watch. And if they go to Old Trafford with that approach on Sunday, it'd be a hell of a game. I really like what he's trying to do, and I can see what he's trying to do, but I can't see what Ten Hag's trying to do. I really can't. And I think a lot of people have given him the benefit of the doubt for 2 years now, but in terms of his tactical plan, in terms of his plan to grow a team, I still don't see it.
I'm going to pop you a bit of a hot potato pass here, John. But I want you to fight the corner of Erik Ten Hag and why he's going to get it right at Manchester United. Can you do that? Can you see anything that suggests that he is going to get it right?
In the long term? Or in this game?
However long, because it seems as if he is getting a longer term than people may have expected.
Yeah, I think when I look at Manchester United at the moment, it's sort of hard to know exactly what's going on, because it seems like there's a lot of players, there's lots of actors and agents at play, and lots of decision makers. And part of the reason why I think that you said, you look at Ten Hag's tenure at Manchester United, it feels as though he's wafting along a little bit. And I think in part that's because that there is a lack of clarity maybe about where the club should be headed. So, for example, against Crystal Palace last weekend, that was probably the best I've seen Manchester United for ages, possibly ever under Erik Ten Hag. And the reason I say that is because it was a very pronounced tactical shift. It was a shift towards attempts to possess the ball in intelligent ways, rather than just trying to get it forward as quickly as possible and things breaking down a lot. It looked a lot more structured, it looked a lot more comfortable, and I think you could say off the back of that game, with those things in place, it seemed as though if one team was going to win, it was going to be Manchester United. It changed a little bit in the second half and became a little bit more even, but it felt completely different to what I'd seen in the prior weeks. So it's hard for me to know exactly what's going on. Looking at it from the outside, it seems as though there's probably other, as I've said, other actors, other players, other agents in the decision-making process who are having some kind of say on how the team should be playing, when it might not be the way that Erik Ten Hag instinctively wants his team to set up. But it's looking better. So it's hard to know whether or not what we're going to see is a sort of consistent upward trajectory where they start implementing this sort of, I suppose, more elite style, the sort of style that you see from teams at the top of leagues around Europe, or whether or not we're going to see it sort of flip-flopping backwards and forwards between different play styles for different games. But I do think that it makes it interesting with this game in mind, because I think a lot of people will be like, well, Manchester United, they're just going to be, they're going to try and be really transitional. They'll try and get in behind Spurs because Spurs leave themselves quite open. And so this is a perfect game for them. But if they play like they play against Crystal Palace, where they're trying to be a little bit more patient on the ball, they could come a cropper, because it could be the case that Spurs are able to counter-press well, or Spurs are able to put them under pressure when they're trying to build up. So yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting thing. It's hard to say exactly, to answer your question, what the future looks like, because it does feel as though, who knows, it could be like 3 or 4 bad performances away from the sack. And I think in those scenarios, it always makes it harder to analyse exactly what it is that a manager is trying to do, because I think they start to second guess themselves sometimes, and they start making decisions that are clearly based around trying to keep themselves in a job. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how they're going, because I do think that they look better this season than last season, which I don't think it's not a particularly high bar. But at the same time, I suppose the big question is going to be, what if raising the floor, which is what I think they've done, gets them to a sort of mid-table, just outside the European places sort of situation, and whether or not, once that boils out in the numbers and in a few more games, whether or not the fans are happy with them being, okay, we're a bit more of a solid team now than we were last season, but it doesn't feel like we're going to necessarily make that step up to really challenge with the other top teams.
Tim, just a final one on this game, and it's interesting that John mentioned about other actors at play and decision makers and things like that. I'm pretty sure that the photo was taken at Old Trafford during the game against Twente, and you had Ratcliffe and Brailsford sat in front of Barada, Ashworth and Wilcox all together. There are a lot of minds there, and I just wonder how many of them are thinking, we should have actually made a bolder choice in the summer when we were talking to everyone about potentially taking over from Erik ten Hag. And albeit they showed faith, which is essentially a good human property to have, they almost now need to double down on that decision to try and show that they made the right one, don't they? Because otherwise they've started off with a bit of a howler.
I mean, I wouldn't double down on him just for the sort of sake of it, for the sake of showing some loyalty. I think their fans would probably appreciate them putting their hands up and admitting they might have made a bit of mistake before the season sort of starts to unravel, which you can see it doing in the next few weeks. So I don't know. It was a strange one. They obviously did a very public search for a new manager and felt that they couldn't find anyone who would do any better than Ten Hag. I don't think they've necessarily placed their full faith in him. But then again, they did. They backed him in the transfer market. It's not like they're giving him players. He's obviously very much in consultation with them. When you look at the names of the players that he's brought in, people he's worked with before. So they're setting themselves up for they are placing a lot of faith in him and his abilities to turn this around. And I'm not sure what that's based on, really, other than a very whiffy FA Cup run and obviously fantastic performance and result against Man City in the final. But I feel like if they'd lost that game, then he wouldn't still be in charge of Manchester United. And to just place your faith in him on that result alone, it's not what Manchester United should be doing, in my opinion.
Well, we shall see. Maybe it will all turn around for Manchester United this week and it will kickstart their season. Let's get your predictions, Tim. You did very well last week. You predicted a draw. You nailed it, as always. John, unfortunately you went for a City win. What are you going for this week, John, in this game?
Yeah, it feels like it could be high-ish scoring. I think I said on the Tifo podcast 2-2, so I'll stick with that here. A
2-2. And Tim?
Yeah, I think high scoring as well. I think maybe 3-2 Spurs.
Oh, that'd be good, wouldn't it?
Mm.
Right, let's have a quick focus on some of the key scraps at the bottom of the table. A couple of managers, unfortunately for them, under pressure as well. Everton 1 point down in 18th. Palace 3 points in 16th. And Everton, John, are conceding 2.8 goals per game. Did you see anything in their result last week that gives you optimism for them in this game? Because it feels like a big one. If they lose at home against Crystal Palace, jeepers creepers, the Goodison Booers will be going great guns, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's not great. Everton, interesting because obviously conceding a lot, not great underlying numbers in that respect as well. So it's not as if they're being hugely unlucky. And I think a lot of people think of Sean Dyche as a manager who's going to come in and make you more solid, not concede as many and give you a sort of firm basis from which to then avoid relegation. And I think what we saw last season was, maybe this is a slightly different Sean Dyche that looked a little bit more interesting from an attacking point of view. Everton had incredible set-piece numbers as well last season. This season, it just doesn't seem as though we're getting that attacking upside, which is maybe pulling them down a little bit. But having said that, we've had those two incredible fixtures where they went 2-0 up and ended up not being able to hold out for wins or even draws in either of them. So that's, definitely the worrying thing here is Everton's defensive capacity. But yeah, Crystal Palace as well. I mean, we went into the season with people expecting, people, I good friends of mine who are Palace fans going, well, maybe we can even sneak into European places this season off the back of what happened at the end of last season. And now, struggling to even pop their head above the relegation line in the table. So this is another one of those fixtures like the one we've just talked about, where it's like very much this needs to be a fixture that is treated by the team that wins it as a starting point for getting themselves out of the situation that they're in. But I think, obviously with Palace, they're going to easily have enough to avoid relegation, I think. But Everton, maybe a little bit more touch or go. You'd think that they have the players to be able to get out of this, and all it takes is a good run of 5 games often, and that can be enough to get you out of there. So I'm not worrying about Everton just yet, but 2 teams who I think are maybe performing much worse than we expected to at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and Everton do have a lot of injuries at the moment, so they will hope to sort of strengthen as they go. Another interesting one to look out for, Tim, is Brentford against West Ham. 3 defeats out of 4 for West Ham, hammered 5-1 in the Carabao Cup at Anfield. Knowing Julian Lopetegui as you do from his time at Wolves, should West Ham fans be worried, or is he going to get things right? Is he the right fit?
I mean, I think he's a decent fit for West Ham in terms of being able to form a decent team that can play top half football, and they're not going to be in a relegation battle, I don't think. But we sort of questioned in the summer, if they want a free-flowing, entertaining antidote to David Moyes, and Lopetegui's never going to be that. But what would be alarming in that, during his career at Sevilla and at Wolves, he has managed to very much set up a team defensively pretty effectively. And they've had an absolutely shocking week. So, I don't know. They keep conceding first. They've got Kilman and Mavropanos as their sort of back 2, who aren't the quickest. And yet you look at the state of their high line against Chelsea last week. It was just bizarre. They sort of instructed them to play that way. So, I think they're not settled yet at all. I mean, they brought in some players in the summer. Fulkrug, we haven't really seen much of. I think he's missed the last 2. Jean-Claire Todibo hasn't featured yet. He's the big centre-back they brought in the summer. You'd expect him to be blooded soon because he hasn't been quite fit yet. But their XG against is 10 goals from 5 games. As is Brentford's, actually, which should make for a decent game, I think, at the weekend. Only Ipswich are worse than those 2. And also, interestingly, Lopetegui was seen hobbling away from Anfield on crutches in the week. And obviously, we wish him a speedy recovery. But having watched Mick McCarthy wave crutches around on the dugout after he'd had a pre-planned operation at Wolves manager a few years ago, I've got to say that they're a great tool to have. They're great for pointing and also for celebrating. I remember Mick having sort of both in the air celebrating a goal. So hopefully he's recovered quickly, but if not, look forward to seeing the crutches.
Yeah, you don't need to be on crutches, do you, at a time like this? It's
not a good look.
No, it's not a good look. We wish him a speedy recovery, as you said. Let's move on to Newcastle against Manchester City. Obviously, the big headline for City is no Rodri for the remainder of the season, coming swiftly after Tim, the burnout Doctor of Doom, was saying that something's going to happen, and he'd been talking about it as well. So it's a real shame for him, and a player who is being regarded in the Ballon d'Or sort of conversation. You don't want him to be missing. Obviously, they don't want him to be missing. But it will be so interesting to see how City react to his absence. If Newcastle win, they'll move level on points with Manchester City on 13. John, do you see an upset here? And do you see Manchester City coming up with the right combination in midfield over the course of this season to ensure that they win the title again?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions there, I suppose. In answer to the first one, I mean, any team can upset City. We know exactly the blueprint of how you beat a Man City team, and that blueprint is based around taking one of those moments that City allow where you can attack big spaces and get through. And I suppose, as Chris was saying there, Newcastle do have the players to be able to do that. Whether or not I would be confident going into this game as a Newcastle fan that they would do that is another question entirely. But yes, they can definitely do that if things go their way. What was the other question?
The other question was, will City over the course of the season find the right combination to fill the massive void left by Rodri?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the first 3 games of their season, they played without him, largely. In fact, in all 3, I think, that he didn't come on and then came on in the 4th one. And they looked good. In many respects, I did some content for the Athletic FC on the YouTube channels, just having a look at the way that they'd played in the first 3 games. They looked really tactically assured. they weren't playing their best players. They had 3 players out, and the big question is how are you going to fit them in? One of them was Rodri. We had Kyle Walker as well, and we had Phil Foden hadn't played much in those games either. So I think people are going to be surprised a little bit maybe by what impact this has on City's season, because I think a lot of people are looking back at previous seasons where when Rodri hasn't played, City haven't been able to get going at all. I think they're much better suited now to actually be able to absorb that loss. Kovacic seems to understand the number 6 role much better. Yes, it's going to make them a little bit more flaky, I guess, from in and out of possession sense in those scenarios. But I think that, this is what Pep Guardiola does. He takes these situations where there's a potential problem and he finds solutions for them. I expect that City will actually not be as bad as people are maybe thinking they will be off the back of losing Rodri. Obviously Rodri is incredible, the best player in that position in the world perhaps ever, but yeah, Manchester City are more than the sum of their parts. So I think that the point is that you can absorb those kind of losses by making sure that the team, that the players on the team are structured and drilled in such a way as to be able to play without him regardless. So yeah, it should be quite an interesting one, although I feel as though I've set them up to lose against Newcastle now.
Well, either way, Manchester City's title rivals will be licking their lips at the fact that Rodri is going to be missing for the rest of the season, because it is a potential disruptor for the title race, including Arsenal, of course, off the back of 3 away games. Obviously, they had that free pass in the Carabao Cup against Bolton. Do you think Arsenal are going to win the title now that Rodri's out, Tim? Or would they have won it anyway?
I mean, we're talking about, what did they lose the title by last year? 2 points, was it? Mm-hmm. You take Rodri away, I think you're probably looking at a few points off City's total. Well, we don't know, do we? As John says, they are better equipped to cope without in the season, but we don't know. He'd missed before the start of the season. I think he'd missed 5 matches in 5 years. But I think what was interesting coming out of the narrative last weekend is that Arsenal have definitely sort of got under their skin, which I think is a really good thing for them. City were rattled, not just sort of how they reacted during the game and at full time with all the shenanigans, but after the game, like some of the quotes from like John Stones and Akanji and others, they were like tearing into Arsenal. Like, they're I'm completely paraphrasing, but they're disgusting tactics and but we're still going to win the league and all this kind of stuff, and they've called them sort of mentally fragile in the past. So yeah, it makes for a great rivalry. It was a fascinating game. I thought, we're going to have to see a different side of Arsenal now, because next 3 games are Leicester, Southampton and Bournemouth. And as we said last week, I'm not really concerned about Arsenal in the big games. I think they've proved that they can go almost anywhere and get a result now. But it's when teams come to the Emirates and stick, not necessarily Leicester, because I don't think they're good enough defensively to cope at all, but come to the Emirates and stick 10 men behind the ball, can Arsenal break them down consistently? Have they got the players to score enough goals? Have they got the variety in their attack? They've proved they've got the defence to win the league, but now they need to prove they've got the attack to win the league, I think.
Let's move straight on to Chelsea, who are just a position behind Arsenal in 5th. They host Brighton on Saturday. Anyone know when Chelsea were last in 5th in the table? Either of you? Little quiz, impromptu, blank faces. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see them in all their glory.
When were they last in 5th in the table?
Yeah, as high as 5th. Don't look at your screen.
A couple of years ago, 2022.
Yeah, exactly, a couple of years ago, October the 22nd, 2022. Nosebleed stuff, isn't it, gents? Come on, get excited. Chelsea have turned it around. They're heading in the right direction. Yeah, exactly. If we can isolate the audio there of Tim saying, go Chelsea, and just have it, and we can just press a button every time they win, that would be great. In the meantime, let's check in with Luke Bosher, who's been speaking ahead of the game on the Chelsea pod straight out of Cobham.
It's ostensibly a team that Chelsea should beat, but they're a team that's very well drilled, and they play good football, as it were, and they have proven that they will not be easy to beat for any of the big sides. Arsenal have already drawn with Brighton this season, so I think that tells you a bit about the calibre of opposition that Chelsea are going to face. And I think, other than Manchester City to open the season, it may well be Chelsea's toughest game so far.
What do you reckon, John? Right, me and you are getting into an elevator. We've got 3 floors to go up. Elevator pitch on how this is tactically going to break down Chelsea against Brighton. Go. You've got about 45 seconds.
This is another tough game to read, because if you actually look through Chelsea's season so far, it's very hit and miss. They lost their opening game to Man City. They've drawn with they beat Wolves despite the fact that they got XG'd a little bit. They lost to Servette in the Conference League. They then drew with Palace and probably deserved to win, but then won against Bournemouth and probably deserved to lose. And then they had that absolute doozy against West Ham, and then a doozy in the Carabao Cup as well. So I'm still at the point with Chelsea where I'm like, I really don't know what level they're at right now. And I think this is the first game where we're going to get a good sense of just how good they are. Brighton have the tactical chops to be able to cause them problems, and the players to cause them problems as well. And I'm really fascinated to see how this one plays out, because what we get from Maresca is just very solid, sort of like 3-2-5 stuff. You invert your fullback, you get into the nice structure, and then you have incredible players who sort of bail you out of problems when you're not winning late on in games. So for him to convince me that he isn't just a sort of cut and paste positional play in scare quotes manager, I want to see him coming out in games like this where Brighton will have a tactical approach that can cause some problems, and they neutralise that approach and they find ways of breaking them down.
A doozy, just for people listening in the UK that don't know what doozy mean, what does doozy mean?
Is that a non-UK word?
I don't know really. It means easy, does it?
Yeah,
doozy?
I guess a bit of a tap in.
Tap in. Jolly good. Right, Liverpool. Oh, yeah, Tim. Oh, dear. Okay. So Liverpool, we'll get to you in a minute, Tim. They have, like most Europa League teams, also in the Carabao Cup, they've had a tough old run of games, 7 in 22, I think it is. So Arne Slot's been rotating his side, brought in Darwin Núñez against Bournemouth. I'm not going to talk to you about Liverpool, Tim. I'm going to talk to you about Wolves, okay? And I'm doing this for a reason, and I'm doing it for Liverpool fans, because the last time we had an expert on the opponents, Nottingham Forest and Nick Miller, prior to the game at Anfield when Nottingham Forest won, we got a briefing as to what Liverpool need to be wary of, and he got it right. Should Liverpool be wary of Wolves? Can Wolves do anything to them that they should be worried about, or are you quite worried that it's all going sort of slightly south for Gary O'Neill and co?
I mean, it is going south. You know, they're bottom of the league with 1 point, bottom of the league, not having a laugh. And in terms of threats, I mean, Matheus Cunha can do something from nothing, and he's come on an awful lot in the last year, and he would be an obvious threat. But the problem for Wolves is that, you know, in terms of him playing in tandem with others, like he was last season with Neto, who's left the club, and Hwang, who's bang out of form and dropped. So he's sort of having to do it on his own to a certain extent, but he is capable of some moments of genius. So they should just stick a couple of players on Cunha and then not really worry about anybody else. Wolves are in a pretty bad position. You know, there was an improved performance at Villa last week. They were 1-0 up, but obviously went on to lose 3-1. But they also lost Yerson Mosquera for the season. Yeah, he was effectively Max Kilman's replacement. They decided to go 4 at the back in the summer, and therefore didn't sign an extra centre half, because they thought, we don't want too many centre halves. And then they lost 6-2 to Chelsea, and Gary O'Neill said, right, we're going to go 5 at the back. And then he's looked around his dressing room and I haven't got enough defenders for that. And now they've lost Mosquera. So yeah, they're in a they're in a bit of trouble, and they've got the worst start of any team, you know, in terms of difficulty of fixtures. Got City coming up as well. So yeah, I would be concerned for Gary O'Neill, but I'm more concerned for Wolverhampton Wanderers at this point. But you know, historically, they've got a shock in them. You know, they beat City at home last year. You know, they have got it in them. They're just not really showing it at the moment.
Where are you going to be this weekend, Tim?
I'm going to be here, where I am right now. Going to be at home.
Ah, lovely. John, are you visiting any matches?
I'm not. No, I am plugged into my computers.
How about you, Adam?
I'm going to be watching a lot of games. and I'm going to be coaching as well. Yeah, coaching.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Watford got a new manager, have they?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we didn't actually mention Watford on the show this week, who ran Man City relatively close in the Carabao Cup, which is a rarity for us. We didn't get absolutely hammered, so fair play to Watford. We only lost 2-1. Let's end the podcast there. Tim, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you to John.
Thank you.
Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Enjoy the various podcasts on offer from The Athletic. Thank you very much for listening, for watching on YouTube as well. Keep your comments and your suggestions coming in. Always good to read them. And we will be back on Monday. Have a good one.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.